Jews are increasingly being pushed out of the West. How is this going to end? I discuss the details of what's happening and how Israel's internal power struggles and our relationship with the Trump administration are going to determine the future of Jews throughout the world. Coming up on In Focus. So Black Friday was on Friday, and President Joe Biden, just like the rest of the world, went on a shopping spree. And what is it that President Biden, apparently weekending it at Nantucket Island, came away with? Well, what else would you come away with if you're the president of the United States and going shopping at Nantucket Bay? Obviously, Rashid Khaledi's The 100 Years War. What is it called? The 100 Years War on Palestine, a history of settler colonialism and resistance, 1917 to 2017. Now, this isn't just a book purchase, right? This is a sign. This is a message. What is the message? Well, to understand what President Biden was communicating, I think that we need to go wider. We need to go and see what he was doing in the context of what's happening all over the Western world. And we can start our little trip with London. So this morning when I was preparing the show, I came upon a Twitter or an X post by Nicole Lampert, who is a great Jewish advocate in Britain and activist for Jewish rights, etc. And she wrote the following post on her X feed. She wrote, "Candida Gertler is an art philanthropist who has donated millions to help struggling young artists. She's also a Jew and, like most Jews, a Zionist. Of course, that meant that she was ripe for cancellation. Her name was taken off the donor board of Goldsmith at Goldsmith College of University of London, and there was an attempt also to have her canceled from the Tate. Well, they got their way. Another major donor to the arts has decided to walk away rather than be hounded by the bullies who want to see Jews hounded out of public life." So she refused to be hounded out of public life by leaving voluntarily. Describing why she was quitting all her voluntary positions in the UK arts world, she asked why people were refusing to stand up to these bullies. She left as a protest, writing, I'm not going to read the whole thing, but it says, "As someone who has dedicated much of my life to supporting contemporary arts, championing dialogue, and creating platforms for diverse voices, I can no longer stand silent when institutions intimidated by violent and aggressive activism that dismisses dialogue or any kind of communication fail to uphold the foundational values of equality and respect. Recent revelations of vile anti-Semitic sentiments in these spaces have shocked and appalled me. These are not isolated incidents, but part of a broader culture that seeks to marginalize and dehumanize Jews." And she went on, Mrs. Gertler did, and talked about how Jews were marginalized during the Holocaust and dehumanized. And of course, the echoes of that period of European history 90 years ago are being felt over and over and over again. And I should add that Candida Gertler wasn't the first Jewish philanthropist of the arts that was pushed out of her positions in the art world. As a philanthropist, in 2019, the American art philanthropist Warren Kander was pushed off of his position as the vice chairman of the board of directors of the Whitney Museum in New York because he was pro-Israel. Kander apparently has a company that sells equipment used by the IDF. And for that, he was ostracized by people who were getting his money, ostracized by people he was supporting, and pushed out of the Whitney Museum's Board of Governors. Because obviously you can't have a Jew who supports Israel, America's most important, most powerful ally in the Middle East, on your board at the Whitney Museum. So it was Kander, and then 5 years later, it's Gertler. Jews are just being pushed out. And of course, it's not just in the high cultural areas where Jews are being pushed out. They're also being pushed out of life, basically, right? We had a situation in London just a couple of weeks ago or last week, I can't remember, when an ultra-Orthodox girl walking in Stamford Hill was brutally beaten by a gang of Arabs who were attacking her and her Jewish friends with bottles, and she was hospitalized. And then last week, There was something even more frightening. There's an article about it, a write-up in the Daily Mail. Jewish children left terrified as thugs pelt their London school bus with rocks before storming it and running and yelling, F Israel, while frightened pupils cowered behind seats. Just to be clear, the pupils in question who were going to their Jewish day school were 10 to 12-year-old kids, okay? So they're on their school bus going to school, and they get stoned when they're stopped at a bus stop to pick up boys and girls going to school. They get stopped by these anti-Semitic goons who know that this is a bus taking Jewish children to school. There were two buses actually driving one after the other. And then 5 teenagers got onto the bus and started attacking the children in the bus, right? And so some of them ran away, and some of them were, as the headline said, cowering behind their seats. And there was a temporary driver of the bus that was attacked, and he didn't see any reason to report the incident. He didn't say anything to authorities about the fact that these Jewish children were forced to flee their school bus because these anti-Semitic thugs got onto their school bus while they were going to school to attack them on their school bus after they had stoned their school bus, right? So this is pure terror that is being carried out against Jewish children in London, and they're not even walking down the streets. They're in a bus, okay? It's not like Haredi girls walking down the streets. Oh my God, Haredi in public, no good. No, these are just Jewish kids going to school in a bus, right? And so they get onto the bus to attack them. They come to where they are in an enclosed space, and then the driver in this enclosed space, in the school bus, he was temporary, you see, so he didn't really know that you were supposed to report criminal incidents of attacks, assaults against children on your bus, so he didn't. Honest mistake. It could have happened to anybody, right? Obviously, a temporary driver isn't supposed to know that he's supposed to do these things. How did we find out about it? Because some of the parents of these kids reported the incident to the police. Now they're looking at it as a possible hate crime. Oh, you think? Really? Really? You think so? So, I mean, that's England, and that's children in England, Jewish children in England. And here I just have the statistics, 69% of Jews in England are afraid to have any identifying marks on them that they're Jews when they're walking on the streets, when they're in public. 69%. That's huge, right? And then they also have latest figures from the Jewish Charity Community Security Trust said that there's been a surge, of anti-Semitism in the UK over the past year. Latest figures show 5,583 incidents were recorded between October 7th, 2023 and September 30th of 2024. That figure is 3 times that of the previous 12-month period, which saw 1,830 incidents recorded in total. Right? So, I mean, 5,583. I saw a headline in the paper that said that Jews are the subject of the most hate crimes in New Zealand, because obviously in New Zealand, you're not allowed to be Jewish there. Same in Australia, same all over the place. And this, this isn't the only place it's happening. And by the way, there's state support for this, right? So the Hamas people, they protest, they call for genocide against Jews every weekend in London, and they're not stopped. To the contrary, you have Keir Starmer's government that is supporting them. They participated in, they announced an embargo of arms against Israel, apropos of absolutely nothing. Why? David Lammy, their foreign minister, said that the UK will respect the ICC's shockingly anti-Semitic arrest warrants against Prime Minister Netanyahu and former Defense Minister Yoav Gallant. So this is state support for genocidal anti-Semitism. And of course, they're not alone. Justin Trudeau, the Prime Minister of Canada, same thing. He's going to support the ICC warrants. And on November 22nd, Friday night, Shabbat, Jews in Montreal going out, going to synagogue, going home, going to meals, walking, because you're not allowed to drive on Shabbat, right? And so they started an anti-Semitic riot in Montreal, because why wouldn't you? So they did it outside of some NATO meeting of NATO parliamentary factions or whatever, meeting in Montreal. They go to the conference center. It's like Kristallnacht. They're breaking windows, they're burning cars, and it's not against NATO. It's not against, intervening on behalf of Ukraine against Russia. No. This is just a pure pro-Hamas, anti-Semitic, calling for genocide of Jews riot in Montreal. And it went on for hours, right? And they were just bombing the city. And it took hours for the Montreal police to do anything about it. And in the meantime, you had, well, Trudeau couldn't do anything because he was too busy partying at a Taylor Swift concert. No joke, right? That's what he was doing. There he is partying. I'm Justin Trudeau. I don't care about the Jews. It took him 2 days to condemn what had happened on the streets of Montreal against the Jews of Montreal on Friday night. And then just this week, what happened, or last week, my friend Ezra Levant from Rebel News, he lives in the Jewish neighborhood of what's it called? Of Bathurst in Toronto. And, they've, the Toronto police are absolutely horrible. As I saw this Toronto Sun reporter, he was explaining that at least in Montreal, they ended up taking action after a fashion. But in Toronto, you've had these pro-Hamas marches, demonstrations through Bathurst neighborhood, which is a very Jewish neighborhood in Toronto. Lots of synagogues, kosher restaurants, and Jews. It's a Jewish neighborhood in Toronto. And you've had weekly pro-Hamas protests or demonstrations, parades up the central thoroughfare of Bathurst. They've had fire bombings of Jewish schools and synagogues in Bathurst as part of these pro-Hamas actions. And so last week they had this yet another pro-Hamas demonstration where they actually had this guy dressed up as Yahya Sinwar, the mastermind of the October 7th slaughter, and he was there celebrating Sinwar, celebrating this arch terrorist, this mass murderer, this Nazi war criminal, right, in this Jewish neighborhood. So Ezra Levant, who lives in Bathurst and is Jewish, he comes up with his cameras and everything, and he wants to interview these Hamas supporters. And so they're obviously acting in a threatening way against the Jews of Toronto. And so he got arrested for filming them because he was, according to, no joke, his name is actually Sergeant McDuff of the Canadian Police. He comes up, he arrests Ezra for disturbing the peace. So they're allowed to come in and attack Toronto's Jews, but, the Jews aren't allowed to be Jewish in their neighborhood without disturbing the peace. And that's something that's been sort of going along this whole time, that it's the Jews who have to stand down. The Berlin police chief said last week, she explained that, in certain neighborhoods, you shouldn't walk around with any visible signs of being Jewish or being gay or lesbian or bisexual, because gays, the LGBTQ crowd and Jews are not welcome in Muslim enclaves in Berlin, and the police can't really protect you. Right. And this is, of course, just a few weeks after you had the pogrom against the soccer fans from Israel in Amsterdam, where they were hunted literally down by Uber drivers and by these mobs of Arabs, of Muslims in Amsterdam, in the Dutch capital, because they're Jewish. Right. And humiliated and attacked and beaten and thrown into the channels and all the rest of it, canals or whatever. And that's what they were doing. So after this happened, everybody sort of condemns it. Of course, the police didn't do anything to protect the Jews while they were being hounded because they're Jews in Amsterdam, because you just don't do that, because that's the whole point, that pogroms really involve a level of state support. And so you had that in spades with the Amsterdam police, but you also have that with the Dutch government, which is problematic, right? This is a government that's supposed to be on the right, that's supposed to be pro-Israel. You have Geert Wilders, who is sort of the most powerful man in Dutch politics, and it's a coalition being led by his party. He's not in the government because he's a red, he's a red sheet or whatever it's called for all of the leftists and for everybody else, all right-thinking Dutch who would prefer to be with jihadists than to be with somebody fighting for their national identity like Geert Wilders. But all the same, his party is the main party in this coalition. And yet, all the same, you had the foreign minister of Holland. First of all, the Dutch government came out and said that they would respect the ICC's arrest warrants against Netanyahu and Galen, which is shocking, although not surprising since, of course, The Hague is in Holland. But all the same, it's appalling. This is an anti-Semitic court. It's not a court. It's a political body that is organized around the principle of delegitimizing, of criminalizing the Jewish state and its people. And it's starting with its leaders, but going down to the last line soldier in Israel. And, and here's Holland accepting the legitimacy of it, just as Canada does, just as Britain does under the Labour government. And then the foreign minister was supposed to come to Israel after announcing that he was going to honor the arrest warrants against our leaders, right? And so he was disinvited. And so he went and he met with whom? Oh, his Iranian counterpart. And what is the message that he sends to the streets, that he sends to all the Muslims who just attacked all of these visiting Jews from Israel? That they're right, that absolutely this is totally cool with him, right? That's what he was saying. And, there are basically two explanations for what is happening, the state sponsorship or the state support, even if it's just, wink, wink, nod, nod kind of thing, of all of these leaders in Western capitals for this kind of Islamist anti-Semitism, these calls for genocide of Jews, and this harassment, this horrible harassment of Jewish people on the street, women, children, men, doesn't matter. In these Western countries. And so the first explanation is that they support the Islamists, that they're with them. And I think that you can see that in places like Canada, in places like Britain that are led by these very radical, progressive governments. Yes, David Lammy and Keir Starmer, they're totally cool with the Islamist agenda, right? They're fine with it. That's because their Labour Party is. I mean, it's not for nothing that Jeremy Corbyn was elected to be the leader of the Labour Party. And they like to say that it was purged, that kind of anti-Semitism, but it wasn't. And Keir Starmer is sort of like, a warmed over Jeremy Corbyn who is acceptable in public, and he has a nice Jewish wife who, makes him gefilte fish or whatever, while he is allowing the Hamasnic crowds to riot in the streets of London and call for the genocide of the Jews. And that's a problem. So, there's this kind of tendency of progressives to stand with Islamists. And so they're enabling this agenda because they agree with the anti-Western outlook that the Islamists put forward when they speak, and they don't have a problem, and they may actually embrace the anti-Semitism as well, particularly because it's called anti-Zionism. So it sounds like, apropos Rashid Khalidi, who we'll get to now, it's like anti-colonialist, and all right-thinking progressives think that Western imperialism is bad. But the second explanation for this is that they're just standing down, that they just they don't have the will, they don't have the votes, they don't think it's important enough. It's not that they're anti-Semites per se, it's just that they're not going to get into a fight with the Islamists. The Islamists have too much power. They're too powerful as a social force. They don't accept the authority of central governments or police forces. And these politicians just want quiet. They don't want to have to deal with this. So they're not going to protect the Jews, in Paris. They're not going to protect the Jews in London. They're not going to protect the Jews in Amsterdam because it's just not worth their while. It's too hard. The Islamists are too powerful. They're too numerous. And here, you saw this very clearly with the conservative government of Rishi Sunak in Britain at the beginning of the war, right? I mean, so starting on October 7th, you started having these pro-Hamas demonstrations in central London, which were shocking to many, many people. And the government of Rishi Sunak, he didn't want to do anything about it. And he was like, oh, that's really bad or whatever, and then proceeded to do absolutely nothing. And he had the Home Secretary, Suella Braverman, who wanted to block them. She wanted to outlaw them. She wanted to stop them. And they could have. I mean, if the Metropolitan Police of London had taken action against these protests in the initial months, and they would have stopped them. They could have stopped them. They could have arrested these people calling for genocide of the Jewish state and the Jewish people. But Rishi Sunak, instead of siding with Braverman, as she was, beginning to, push a policy that would have blocked these anti-Jewish riots from being carried out every week in London, he fired her. And now, is Rishi Sunak an anti-Semite? I doubt it. But, was his government anti-Semitic? No, not more than is absolutely necessary. As they say of British anti-Semitism, somebody who hates Jews more than is absolutely necessary. And they were under that level. But he didn't want to get into a fight with the Islamists. So he preferred to just side with or enable the Hamas supporters, fire Braverman, and let the Jews suffer because it was too much of a pain And this brings us back to Biden and his sudden love for Rashid Khalidi as he's walking out of office or shuffling off from office in his final 50 days in power. What was that about, right? What was that about? So, a lot of people are like, well, he didn't read it, and somebody just put it in his hand, and look at him, and he's been shaking hands with air for the past couple of years, and he was pushed off the ticket because of his advanced dementia, and you can't really fault him because he doesn't know what he's doing, right? And so that speaks to two things. One is, oh my God, he's the president of the United States until January 20th. Isn't that frightening? But also to the fact that, if it's true, who are the people who are pushing those sort of things in his hands? And I've been saying this all along, which is that Biden has surrounded himself, or Obama appointed for Biden, all of these people who are in positions that determine American Middle East policy, whether it's Maher Bitar in the National Security Council, or Hadi Amar in the State Department. Jake Sullivan is supposedly the most supportive of Israel, is not supportive. He was one of the first architects of the Iran nuclear deal. Tony Blinken is very hostile to Israel, as we've seen for the past year. All of the Wendy Sherman, who was his deputy, and she was the architect of the Iran deal as well. So you're looking at all of these people, whether they're Muslims like Maher Bitar and Hadi Amar, who really hate Israel and seek its annihilation, have been open in their support for the destruction of the Jewish state, or whether it's people who, are going to want to attach themselves to this idea that the Jewish National Liberation Movement of Zionism, it was a colonialist movement, even though it was an anti-colonialist movement, and that the Jews are not native to the land of Israel, when literally the Bible says that they are. All of these people who don't like the Bible, don't want to be upsetting people in the Middle East or whatever, they go along with it. But all of them are the ones who have been the architects of Biden's deeply, deeply hostile policies towards Israel for the past 4 years, and his absolute refusal, particularly over the past 13 months, to do anything effective to douse the flames of this anti-Semitic fire that has just been ablaze throughout the United States since October 7th, 2023, right? I mean, they've done nothing. They've taken no action against the campuses. They've taken no action against the corporations. They have not protected the Jews anywhere. Essentially, they've taken no action to do so, and they can't talk about anti-Semitism without talking about Islamophobia. Before October 7th, they put out this strategy for fighting anti-Semitism that essentially neutered any chance of the United States taking its effective action against anti-Semites in the United States. So, this has been going on since the outset of the Biden administration. Now it's just putting out in the open. And he's saying this is the direction that the United States is going in. And most notably, he's reading this book, or pretending to read this book, or whatever, holding this book at a time, when it's supposed to be anti-colonialist. But what they're doing is they are advancing a neo-colonialist, a neo-imperialist position, both vis-a-vis Israel and the Palestinians, and Israel and Hezbollah-controlled Lebanon. So this morning, I woke up to the news that President Biden has appointed Jasper Jeffers, Major General Jasper Jeffers from CENTCOM, to essentially be the American viceroy in Lebanon. He's just gone from Qatar, or wherever they are, to the U.S. Embassy in Beirut, where he is supposed to oversee the implementation of the ceasefire between Israel and Lebanon, which is really a joke, right? Because Hezbollah is continuing to try to regroup, to organize attacks, to come into areas that they're prohibited from entering into, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Right? But whatever. So what is Jeffers' job? His job is to essentially mitigate or undermine, as Tony Badran has said, Israel's sovereignty. So it's to say that Israel and Hezbollah are like equals. They're like moral equivalents of one another. This U.S. ally that just killed Mahmoud Dukduk, who executed 5 American soldiers in Fallujah in 2011, were the exact same as Dukduk himself, who killed the American servicemen, right, who executed them in a grisly execution on their base, right? So we're the same. The people who kill America's enemies and America's enemies were the exact same, because that Jeffers is there to be the arbiter of claims that Hezbollah is breaching a ceasefire. This is insane, but that's what he's supposed to do. And how is he supposed to do this? Well, if Israel is supposed to submit complaints to Jeffers, and Jeffers is supposed to then go to the Lebanese armed forces, which are subordinate to Hezbollah, and to the Lebanese intelligence services that are subordinate to Hezbollah, give them the privileged information that Israel just shared with him, the classified information, and they're supposed to then take care of it. And if they don't take care of it, then Israel gets to attack. So this is a total abrogation, or at least an attenuation, of Israel's right to self-defense on behalf of terrorists and terrorist auxiliary forces, which are the fake the optical illusion that is the Lebanese armed forces and the Lebanese intelligence forces, which again are just auxiliary forces to Hezbollah. And here's Jeffers, and because that's really the Obama vision. It's a neo-colonialist, a neo-imperialist vision where everybody is supposed to, American allies are supposed to essentially adopt the Democratic Party, the Obama party's globalist perspective, where we all have to adopt progressive values, reject our own national rights on behalf of this gobbledygook that the progressives put forward as some sort of an idea that Western countries are evil, and Jews, which aren't really even a Western country, but whatever, we're the worst of the worst, because all of Western civilization is based on the Bible. So if we're good, then that means that so is the West, right? So we're supposed to essentially commit national suicide, abstain from asserting our sovereignty, subjugating or subordinating our sovereignty to the whims of an American major general who doesn't necessarily know anything, and certainly is not necessarily sharing our view of the need to annihilate Hezbollah in order to protect Israel, and that it would be a good idea for Hezbollah to be annihilated because Hezbollah is a bad actor. He may not share that perspective, but the Biden administration certainly does not. And now he's there, and then the Trump administration is going to inherit this position where you have this viceroy at the U.S. Embassy in Beirut who's supposed to be lording over Israel and telling us who we can and cannot kill and what we can and cannot do in Lebanon because Hezbollah and Israel are moral equivalents. This is just a continuation of Obama's policies. And they were policies that the Trump administration, that President Trump in his first term did not abrogate. Okay, so, this is bad. And then the question is, how is Trump going to go on this issue? Is he just going to go along to get along as he did in his first term, or is he going to walk away from this? And here I just want to point out an article that I read on my trip back to Israel last week. It's from Tuesday, November 22nd, November 26th, Financial Times, and it's written by the brilliant Gideon Rachman, who is a global affairs columnist at the Financial Times and not a friend of Israel. And so the headline of this, which of course caught my eye, was Israel will split the Western alliance. Okay, it says Israel is going to split the Western alliance because the Trump administration is not going to accept the legitimacy of the International Criminal Court, of which the United States is not a party, and they're planning on sanctioning the ICC because of their scurrilous decision to issue these arrest warrants against Prime Minister Netanyahu and former Defense Minister Yoav Gallant for non-existent crimes in Gaza. And, and so he's warning that Trump may try to dismantle this system of international organizations, which all deserve to be dismantled because they are engines for the facilitation of evil in the world and jihad and the destruction of the nation state. And therefore they're bad. They're antithetical to America's national interest because it's a nation, and America is a nation. They're obviously antithetical not only to Israel's national interest, but to Israel's survival. And so he's saying, well, Europe is all in with this whole international law thing, which he takes seriously, even though he says that nobody else is required to abide by international law except Israel. I mean, he basically says it in so many words. But he says that now we're going to see the fault lines appear where you have Britain and Canada and, who else? Holland and many other countries saying that they're going to respect these arrest warrants. And then you have the United States saying that we're going to sanction not only the ICC, the International Criminal Court, and all of its employees, but we're also going to sanction countries that say that they're going to respect these arrest warrants. So this is the fault line. It's Israel. Israel is the fault line. If you think that Israel is an international outlaw state, then you're on one side of the fault line. And if you think that Israel is a moral and just nation that's being persecuted by the International Criminal Court and more generally by these international institutions, which are wholly corrupt, then you're on the other side of the fault line. And so he is putting his bet on America's going to stand with Israel under Trump. But I think that one of the first places that this is going to be tested is with this viceroy that Biden has inserted, or Biden's team inserted, into the war between Israel and Hezbollah. And they want to try to do something similar in Gaza. And, there are cross currents in the Trump orbit. There's his son-in-law, I can't remember his first name, but his last name is Bulus, and his father, the son-in-law's father, is also very close to Trump, and they are emigres from Lebanon. And they're keen to sort of maintain this kind of fake this policy regarding a fake country called Lebanon, that there is this country called Lebanon, and it's not just a forward operating base for the Iranian Revolutionary Guards units against Israel. It's an actual state, as opposed to, a forward operating base that happens to have about 4.5 million people living on it, which is really what Lebanon has become over the past 2 decades. And that the United States has to be in the middle of Israel and Lebanon as this imperial viceroy to, separate the warring factions, as opposed to standing with Israel in order to defeat Hezbollah. And we can go into the fact that really the way to, defeat Hezbollah is to attack and destroy and overthrow the Iranian regime. That's true. But if we just look at Hezbollah, are you going to maintain this situation where you have this viceroy in Beirut that's supposed to break apart the warring factions or not, and treat them as equals? And, a lot of this is dependent on how things play out in Israel, because Trump himself is anti-imperialist, right? He is a nationalist, and his doctrine and to the extent that he's had massive successes in his first term in office in his foreign policy was because he adopted an anti-imperialist foreign policy where he rejected the idea that the United States is supposed to be the world's policeman. And I'll just say, Walter Russell Mead had this interesting article in the Wall Street Journal last Tuesday, where he was talking about he's a fellow at the Hudson Institute in Washington, and the Indian government brought a delegation of scholars from the Hudson Institute to India, and then brought them to this area, I don't remember what it's called, along the India-China border. That's a site of warfare and skirmishes, and it's a real fault line between India and China. And if India is to be part of the Western U.S.-led alliance against China, then here, the United States is supposed to be standing with India in this area. And the problem is that there are a bunch of tribes that live there, or nations or whatever, and they have different languages, they have different religions, and apparently there are claims, and they may be true, of persecution of Christians or Christian missionaries who are trying to convert Hindus and other religions, people who ascribe to Hinduism and other religions who live in this area that borders China. So the United States has taken this attitude that it's America's job to protect Christians and to protect the missionaries in this area of India. And the Indians are saying, this isn't how an ally behaves. If you really think that you're going to bring us into the fight against China, then let us organize our society as we see fit, and stop dictating to us what we're supposed to be doing in our internal policy. So this is the sort of thing that Trump, as somebody who believes in national sovereignty, probably can understand and say, we have this idea that you shouldn't be prosecuting Christians, and we'd appreciate it if you respect us, but we're not going to stop being India's ally at this critical juncture when we're facing a Cold War, when we're fighting a Cold War against China, because you have different values than we do. And that would be an anti-imperialist statement, and that would be an anti-imperialist posture, and that would be a way of cementing the Indo-American alliance against China. But you have these cross-currents inside of the United States, and it's the same kind of cross-currents that say that Israel has no right to exist as a Jewish state, and we're going to we think that we're going to use colonial imperialist powers to induce an effective abrogation of Israeli sovereignty and transformation of Israel into an American vassal state that has to be beholden to an American viceroy in Lebanon or in Jerusalem that tells the IDF, that dictates to Israel what our policies are supposed to be vis-a-vis our enemies, okay? And it's a very similar question. So how is Trump going to respond to this? And so with regards to Lebanon, obviously, a lot of this has to do with which Israelis is he speaking to, who is presenting Israel's case to the Biden administration. And here, as I said in my intro to this In Focus, a lot of it has to do with who is calling the shots in terms of Israel's national policy. And as all of you Caroline Glick show viewers and listeners know, we have been in a sort of cold civil war here in Israel for many years, where you have the left wing minority of Israel, they're very, very powerful. They control the levers of power in the most powerful institutions in Israel: the Supreme Court, the state prosecution, the Shin Bet, the general staff of the IDF, the Mossad. So these are major, major organs of power. The media, by and large, we're very much controlled by the same leftist elites who view themselves more as part of a global elite than part of Israeli society. And we've seen, particularly, I don't know why, but just an outbreak over the past couple of weeks of members of this class of Israelis openly calling for the destruction of the Israeli government, of its supporters. We had Orna Bana here. I'll just play you a clip of her. She's saying here, that Prime Minister Netanyahu and his supporters are her greatest enemy. We're the greatest enemy of the Israeli ruling class, okay? The people of Israel, the Prime Minister of Israel, we're the greatest enemies. And she is the daughter of one of Israel's sort of aristocracy of Israeli comedy and music. The Banais are sort of an industry in and of themselves, the Banai family. It's like 3 or 4 generations already of singers and comics from this particular family. And here's Orna Banai saying that the people of Israel, the public, are her greatest enemies.
מה שבאמת הרבה יותר מפחיד אותנו זה אנחנו. זאת אומרת, מבחינתי, נתניהו והביביסטים הם האויב שלי. הם מסכנים אותי.
וואו, זה...
כן, הם האויב, בעיניי נתניהו, האויב הכי גדול שלנו. כבר שנים.
And then you have the former chief of staff of the IDF, former defense minister, Bogi Ya'alon, who has just become like stark raving mad, just incredibly anti-Israel. And here he is on this internet channel called Democrat TV, which is run by owned by Kobi Richter, who's one of the heads of the anti-Netanyahu riots and has been a major underwriter of all of these mass riots against the prime minister for the past 5 years. He's also a major political backer of Benny Gantz, of Yair Lapid, and Naftali Bennett. And he has this internet TV called Democrat TV. And here is Bogi Ya'alon, and what is he saying?
וזה לא קשור לימין שמאל, בעד היפרדות ולא מדינה דו-לאומית ומדינת אפרטהייד, או ללכת בדרך שכרגע גוררים אותנו, לכבוש, לספח, לטהר טיהור אתני, תסתכלו על צפון הרצועה, טרנספר, תקראו לזה שאתם רוצים, ולהתיישב יישוב יהודי.
Israel is guilty of ethnic cleansing. Israel is guilty of ethnic cleansing in northern Gaza. And this speaks directly to, this is telegraphed directly to the International Criminal Court and says, hey, guys, yeah, you're right. We're war criminals. Go treat us that way. And here you have his friend and colleague from the ramparts, from the guillotine riots, Nava Rosario, another one of the apasionadas of the anti-Netanyahu riots in the streets of Israel. And here she is in an interview saying that she actually has been making frequent appeals to the International Criminal Court to issue arrest warrants against Netanyahu. Why? Here, just listen to her.
לא יכולה להפיל את הממשלה, כי הם לא התרשמו ממיליון איש ברחובות או מ2 מיליון איש. אבל המחאה כן משדרת לעולם, לממשל ביידן, לטריבונלים בהאג. הם רואים את המחאה והם מבינים שהממשלה לא מייצגת את הציבור הישראלי. מאוד דומה לאיראן. הציבור הישראלי הוא מנותק והוא שונה לגמרי מהמשטר הישראלי. ותפקיד המחאה היא לחזק ולדבר לכל מי שיכול בסופו של דבר כן ללחוץ על מי שיכול להפיל את הממשלה. אני גם פונה הרבה לטריבונלים בהאג כדי שיזרזו את צווי המעצר על נתניהו.
She says, right? What is she saying here? She's saying, oh, this is how we get rid of Netanyahu. We go outside. We go to the International Criminal Court. We say that that our government is criminals. We say it on Democrat TV. And Ya'alon's remarks were quoted. He made this statement over the weekend, and by Saturday night, he was the poster boy of the Arab media. All of them were quoting him, right? All of them were quoting him. And in the meantime, Hamas issues this horrible, horrific hostage video of Idan Alexander, the Golani soldier, one of the soldiers who was taken hostage on October 7th, essentially crying and pleading for his life. And we're the war criminals here, right? And like Hamas is laughing at us because he's saying, look, you got this elite. So, if these elitist Israeli leftists, they have been working hand in glove with the Biden administration for the past 4 years to try to oust Netanyahu from power, keep him out of power when the Lapid government was in power. And they're going to go very clearly, those who are left in power to, first of all, they're trying to oust Netanyahu before January 20th, but they're also, making appeals to Trump. You had reporters from Channel 12, Neria Krauss was there talking to the team of the president saying, don't listen to Netanyahu. He's lying to you guys about the hostages or whatever. And like trying to undermine and subvert the legitimacy of the prime minister of Israel before Trump comes into office. I don't think it is going to work, but it's a question of who's going to be speaking, because one of the reasons that Trump maintained faith with this crazy concept of a viceroy that, Israel and Hezbollah are, if not moral equivalents, then at least, the order in Lebanon where Hezbollah controls everything is acceptable and that the United States should be fundraising it, is because the general staff of the IDF was saying it. It's the general staff of the IDF that was so terrified of Hezbollah that they were saying, oh, we don't want, absolutely appease them. Oh, absolutely, fund the LAF, even though everybody knew that the LAF was subordinate to Hezbollah. Everybody knows these things, but everybody's pretending it away because Israel was, our security elites are risk averse, even though they just increased the risk, as we saw on October 7th, by not dealing with threats when they're still manageable, or making them manageable by dealing with them, right? So, they weren't saying to the Trump administration, listen, stop funding the LAF, stop funding the intelligence forces in Lebanon because they're working with Hezbollah. You're funding terrorism by doing it, because they were thinking, well, let's try to appease Hezbollah to postpone having a reckoning with them for as long as humanly possible. And maybe they'll just change their minds and be moderate, and maybe we can believe, that Tinkerbell is gonna, she's gonna blink her eyes and everything's gonna be fine. And that's basically their belief system. Because if, as Orna Banai or Bogi Ya'alon or Nava Rosario or Ehud Barak or any of these other people, as they say, that the greatest threat to Israel are the people of Israel themselves, or the Jewish people ourselves, then obviously, you're not supposed to do anything against Gaza. You're not supposed to do anything against Lebanon. Just supposed to go along to get along. And just one last clip. Here are two of the top dogs in the anti-Jewish rebellion in Israel of the elites, Ehud Barak and Ami Ya'alon, former prime minister, defense minister, and chief of staff of the army, Barak, and the former chief of the Shin Bet, Ami Ya'alon, speaking on Al Jazeera and saying and justifying Palestinian terrorism. Here's this clip.
Look, I once was asked some 30 years ago what I have been doing if I were a Palestinian. And 30 years ago, I was new enough in politics to tell the truth that if I were born Palestinian, I probably would have joined one of the terror organizations.
I would fight against Israel in order to achieve my liberty. A life of people who dream about freedom and don't see it. Whether we liked it or not, we control the life of millions.
So if these are the Israelis that are talking to Trump, then, what's his name? Rachman, however he pronounces his name in the Financial Times, he can rest easy. Because the United States isn't going to do anything against the international system that's criminalizing Jews and enabling this kind of anti-Semitism. Because the Israelis are saying it's okay. They don't have a problem with it because, Jews, that's, we want to be globalists and we oppose Jewish nationalism and we want to do whatever we need to do in order to be embraced by the David Lammies of the world. Alan Dershowitz, by the way, he wrote this piece in this op-ed in the Wall Street Journal last week where he was talking about how he's assembling a dream team. Here, it's right here. I'm putting together a legal dream team to defend Israel. So he has this whole plan. He has all of these august, really important senior jurists in the United States, two former attorney generals, and Mark Levin, who's the best, obviously, and all these other people who are going to defend Israel to the ICC. Just nice. And the question is, well, why isn't there an Israeli dream team? Why don't we have former attorney generals? Why don't we have former Supreme Court justices doing this kind of thing? Well, because they don't have a problem. They think that the problem, as Orna Bana said, is Netanyahu and his supporters. That's the problem. So, so a lot of people want to believe that if you're a liberal Jew in Britain or in the United States, that you should stand with these liberal Israelis, right? Because obviously you're for them, they're on your side. Except the problem is that if they have their way, then there's not going to the only way that there's going to be a fight against anti-Semitism in Britain that's going to protect the Jews of London, that the Jews of Sydney, Australia are going to be protected, or of Auckland and New Zealand and beyond, and Toronto and Montreal, is if the American government stands up, right? And if they don't stand up, then why would Lammy stop being hostile to Jewish civil rights, including the right to be on a school bus on the way to your Jewish school without being attacked on your school bus? Why would he do that? I mean, there's no countervailing pressure to actually protect the Jews. And so, in a weird way, the determination of that the success of the majority of Israeli Jews here in Israel to assert our sovereign rights and our sovereign power as Jews in this country against these, globalist, post-Jewish, whatever you want to call them, elites who think that we're their biggest enemy, that's going to determine in a very big way how Trump relates to the war against Israel, the war against the Jews here in the region, throughout the Western world. And as a result, it's going to have an impact both on how the war moves forward, attacking Iran's nuclear installations, overthrowing the Iranian regime, et cetera, and how it moves forward on the streets in Toronto, in Montreal, in New York, in LA, in Britain, in France, in the Netherlands, Germany, and so on and so forth. So it's very, at the end of the day, the war against the Jews, how it pans out is going to be determined by how the Jews of Israel organize ourselves and our ability to protect ourselves here at home and assert our sovereign rights here at home and in our region. That's going to then impact how the United States under Trump responds, and then how Jews on the ground throughout the world are treated. Anyway, that's my thought, and I hope you don't think it sounds too much like chaos theory, but I think it's very clear that everything is related to whether or not we stand up for ourselves. It's true everywhere. And one last thing I'll say. I was really amazed. My husband bought me this pendant of the land of Israel for Rosh Hashanah, and I started wearing it along with my Magen David. And I didn't really think about it when I flew to the United States. And I was walking through the terminal in one of the airports, and I started noticing that people are looking at me with these angry looks. And initially, I didn't understand what was going on. And I got the same thing when I'm walking down the street in Washington, D.C., in a number of places. And I was walking with a friend down the street, and I said, I think that guy just gave me a poison look because of my necklaces. And she said, yeah, he did. And I was amazed because I come from Israel, and here, like you wear a Magen David, you wear a map of Israel, nobody cares. But in Washington or, wherever in America, it's a statement, and it can put you in danger in a way. But on the other hand, I thought about it, and in fact, I was like wondering if I should take them off or what I should do. Like, do I want to have a confrontation? I'm only here for a week. How do I want to deal with this? And I just said, you know what? You're not going to take them off. So I didn't, and it was fine. But there was a sense of apprehension that I never had in Israel, obviously, wearing these. And, it really brought home the level of hostility that Jews around the world are facing. And, for an individual Jew walking down the street in New York or wherever, it's a real question. Who's going to protect you? And so the answer has to be that, yeah, the cavalry is coming with Trump, but it can go in a lot of different directions. And, when it comes to the Jews, the people who have to be most pro-Jewish are the people of Israel, or the government of Israel, is the voice of Israel. I think it's great that Dershowitz is doing this at the ICC, but it's horrible that the people leading the charge aren't the jurists of Israel. And that's because they're controlled by people who don't understand. I don't think they understand what it means to be Jewish, but they certainly don't seem to understand the responsibility of the Jewish state for defending Jewish rights here in Israel and throughout the world. And that if you don't defend Israel's rights, if you don't defend the rights of the Jewish people here in Israel, Jews around the world are suffering. So I think, this is really going to come down to how things pan out in Israel. Netanyahu's trial restarts next week, apropos of nothing. And we'll just have to see how that works. And we'll have to see how all of the other things, all of their efforts to oust him from power work. But, we just have to keep it together here. If we keep it together here, I think the next 4 years will be extraordinary. But we have to do what we have to do. Anyway, I'll talk to you later this week. Take care.